I'd like to talk to you today about nerve cells. We're going to look at neuron anatomy and a little bit about action potentials, which is the beginning of neuron physiology. Our objectives today are to discuss the anatomy of neurons and how the neurons communicate, their action potentials, which involves a resting potential, repolarization, depolarization, and a refractory period. The basic structural unit of the nervous system is the nerve cell. Nervous system cells involve afferent neurons, which are sensory neurons that convey information from the peripheral to the central nervous system, the spinal cord, and the brain. Efferent nerve cells, on the other hand, are motor neurons. These motor neurons convey information from the CNS, or central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. Efferent neurons, for example, are the neurons that work hard when you go running. Your brain sends information to the neurons and your muscles move. Motor and sensory neurons are slightly different in their organization. With a sensory neuron, the cell body, with the nucleus inside the cell, is slightly outside the path of the impulse, also called the action potential. The sensory neuron conveys information from the periphery all the way to the central nervous system, and you can see, because of the anatomy of this neuron, the cell body's outside the path of the impulse. With the motor neuron, the cell body is part of the path of the impulse, and it conveys information from the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, through the axon to the target tissue, which in this case is shown as skeletal muscle tissue. Why is that important? In dentistry, it's important because the nerve fibers in the pulp are unmyelinated. Nerve fibers elsewhere tend to be myelinated, which creates more pain for our patients. So what is myelin? When we look at the structure of a single nerve cell, we can see that it has the cell body, also known as the soma, and then it has a long axon, this area with the yellow Schwann cells on it. And at the other end, there's an axon terminal. These yellow Schwann cells are individual cells that create a lining around the axon that we call the myelin sheath. Notice that the Schwann cells do not have a continuous line or barrier all the way along the axon. The Schwann cells have specific little gaps in between each cell. We call these gaps nodes of Ranvier. These are very important in how the nervous impulse is conducted. In a nerve cell without a myelin sheath, the impulse goes slower because it travels slowly along each part of the axon. When the myelin sheath is present, the nerve impulse actually jumps from node of Ranvier to node of Ranvier, like a kangaroo, and that creates a much faster nerve impulse. So the function of the nerve is to carry an impulse, as we've discussed. An action potential is the transient depolarization of the nerve membrane. That means that an electrical impulse, as you can see that's measured here on this graph, the electrical impulse first depolarizes the nerve membrane to reach the action potential that we will see on this video coming up. Then the nerve membrane repolarizes and prepares to be ready for another impulse. When it reaches the ready state of being prepared for another impulse, we call it the resting potential. The resting potential has a section called the absolute refractory period, where this graph dips down. In the absolute refractory period, the nerve is completely unable to respond to the stimulus, no matter what its magnitude. Now I'd like to show you a little video that shows nerve impulses flying along through the nerves.
This neuron is shown 20,000 times larger as in reality. At this tremendous magnification, a hair would be 6 feet thick.
Notice the little bits of light. These represent action potentials traveling through the nerve cell.
They control nearly everything we do, from thinking to moving muscles, from sensing to hearing, and even watching this video.
You can see how the nerve impulse travels great distances throughout our body. So as you can see in our graph, the video clearly showed you how the electrical impulses traveled through the nerve. Each little millisecond along the nerve fiber was depolarizing, creating an action potential, and repolarizing, hitting its absolute refractory period and then a resting potential. And that's how our nerves carry messages.